18 teams will become 15, which means 3 sides will get the chop. Super Rugby expanded last year to include 2 new sides, the Jaguares from Argentina and the Sunwolves out of Japan. Both these new teams are safe despite not performing well in their maiden season. New Zealand currently has 6 teams. None of them will face the Axe though, so that leaves South Africa and Australia. In SA, there's talk that the Cheetahs from Bloemfontein could be paid to leave the competition, but the obvious choice would be to get rid of the Southern Kings from Port Elizabeth, who simply have not been able to compete at this level. And in Australia, the rumour mill suggests that the Western Force are first in line for the drop, but the Brumbies and the Melbourne Rebels are also being considered. Now, drama down under and in the Republic, speculation is rife and the rumour mill is in full flow over who's in line for the drop in Super Rugby. So let's get in Mark Keohane, who knows everything there is to know and more when it comes to rugby union. Keo, lovely to have you on the show as always. Now, let's be honest, you must know what's going on over there. So be real with us. Who is going to get the chop, especially from South Africa, and who should get the chop?
Well, we should get the chop as far as Australia and South Africa are concerned, or 5 New Zealand teams. Then we may have a competition. The talk in South Africa is that the Kings were going to go, but there's a lot of political pressure for the Kings to stay. Hence the 28 million rand a year payout to the Cheetahs to say, you go. They are the domestic champions, however. They haven't performed that well this year in Super Rugby. The alternative could be that the Kings and the Cheetahs merge. But the talk is that 2 teams will go, so possibly the Kings and the Cheetahs could go. But South Africa are saying that 2 teams should go in Australia as well, which the obvious ones there would be the Rebels and the Force to go. There was talk at one stage that the Brumbies would go as well. Australia, though, they went from 3 to 5 to expand the game, to make it national. It really hasn't worked in terms of what they've given to the competition. They've got themselves an international tournament played over 6-7 months, but it's really devalued their challenge. When they had 3 teams, they were a very, very strong force. It spread across 5 teams, some very poor performances, and then obviously the exodus to the Northern Hemisphere. South Africa have never been good enough to have 6 teams. Ideally, they should have 4. I would say that you take the Lions and the Bulls and you merge them, and you take the Kings and you take the Cheetahs and you merge them, and then with the Sharks and the Stormers, you've got a very good quartet. I don't know if that's going to happen. A lot of politicking behind the scenes. Sanzar, though, have to reduce it. They've got to keep the Sunwolves because they've taken the game to Japan. They've got to keep the Jaguares because they've taken it to Argentina. It's anyone's guess who's going to go. It's kind of like, how do they find the solution in what is a problem?
Okay, we've got a very big weekend coming up for Super Rugby, so let's go ahead and pull up the fixtures list. We can actually take a look at your predictions and see some of the winners that you've highlighted for us. Why don't you go ahead and walk us through some of those big games?
Well, the big game, and it's not often you say in a week of Super Rugby, but the big game is in South Africa, and that's in Johannesburg. It's the Lions up against the Sharks. There's no beast playing for the Sharks. The Sharks players have come out and defended themselves, saying they're good enough to have been invited to the Springbok squad for squad training for next week. I still say the Lions at home, at altitude, will be too strong for the Sharks. I've got them to win by 10 to 12 points. Be tough in the first half. I think they'll come away with it in the second half, and the Sharks don't traditionally travel well to Johannesburg, be it in Super Rugby or in the Currie Cup. Got the Stormers down in Cape Town. I've got them to beat the Cheetahs in what will be a high-scoring game. I don't think there'll be a winning bonus point. It will be an entertaining game. I got them to win there. And then in New Zealand, any team, pick a team from New Zealand, and at the moment they'll win. They've just been on fire. Got the Blues to win at home. Got the Highlanders to win at home. I've got the Crusaders and the Hurricanes to travel to Australia and beat what was traditional powerhouses, the Queensland Reds and the Waratahs. I got them to beat both those teams. I feel Australian rugby probably the weakest it's ever been since 1996 when the game went professional.
Now, I know you're a very proud South African, but have you ever tipped an Australian to win a match?
Never. I've got a Maori mum, a grandfather from Ireland, and I was born in Cape Town. And my son was conceived in Manly, Australia. That's the closest I've ever got to tipping anyone for an Australian victory. Every time an Australian team wins in something, something in me dies ever so slightly.
Okay, well, we have to talk about South African rugby because it seems as of late there's not a dull moment going on over there. Now, you used to be very much on the inside, having worked there before. Can you tell us why Rassie Erasmus is refusing to rule out a return to the box, and isn't Coetzee the head coach for the foreseeable future?
I think he's refusing to rule it out because he wants to come back. He wants to coach the Springboks. He wants to be in charge of rugby in this country. And I think most of the country wants him back. He's on a 3-year contract with Munster. He's done particularly well with them in the Pro 12, and obviously he's hosting a quarter-final against Toulouse in the Champions Cup this weekend. They're working very hard behind the scenes to get him back. It's going to cost them a lot to pay Munster out for the next 2 years, and obviously to pay Alistair Coetzee out. It's something like 13 million rand for him. But if South Africa is going to have a chance of fighting back to being a top 3 and consistently a top 3 country, they've got to get the likes of Rassie Erasmus back to work with the Brendan Venter. We know Jake White is not an option. They've said that to him, the leadership. He's gone off to Japan. So if Jake White's not coming back, Nick Mallett doesn't want to coach anymore. Brendan Venter is more consultant. You've got to get Rassie back. Most of his family's in South Africa. He comes back whenever he can. He went to Ireland because he was disillusioned. He wants that Bok job, and he's good enough to do it.